Okay, welcome to part 7 of my examination of Russ Miller's Facts versus Darwin from Carl Baugh's television program Creation in the 21st Century. I'm going to get started. I'm trying to get this done.
Been the messiah for evolution for the past 30 years, even though for 25 years they've known it's just an ape.
That's
Stood
right.
about 3.5 feet tall, drug its knuckles on the ground. In fact, this from 1987 states anatomists have concluded that these creatures are not a link between ape and man and did not walk upright in the human manner. And yet they still teach this as the messiah for evolution.
Okay, so it would, it's really unfortunate that, he makes a claim that Charles Oxnard in 1987 made the claim that, well, he says a bunch of things about them being knuckle-dragging, just apes, knuckle-dragging, no relation to humans, no relation to the human line, and etc. In that, and he has a citation for it. It's just too damn unfortunate that those of us out there in the world have no way of verifying these citations. I mean, it would be so useful if we only had some of the references that he cites. Actually, I have pretty much all of them. And so I'll go to page 227, which is what he claims, and let's see. Well, no, okay, I'm not going to sit there and read the whole thing. It's actually, what he got out of that is scattered throughout this entire page here, and up onto, he's got a whole bunch of graphs and morphometric analyses on the next page about it. Anyway, I'm going to summarize it. You guys are going to have to take my word for it or buy the book yourself. But what the Oxnard concludes, now when this book was written, Oxnard did not believe that Australopithecines were ancestral to modern humans. Now understand that because of unavailability of the material at the time when this book was written, the Lucy skeletons, the Australopithecus afarensis skeletons, were not available to Oxnard for study. He was relying on the so-called Paranthropus, the robustus, the South African Australopithecines Africanus robustus boisei from East Africa and such. So they were relying on that material first of all. So he concluded that they weren't ancestral because he believed that they had a couple of unique adaptations that took them off the human lineage. However, get this, did he conclude that they were knuckle walkers, that they were just apes? No, he concluded that they were absolutely a unique type of thing, a type of creature that was partially arboreal, however, completely bipedal on the ground. However, he believed that because of the structure of their hips, that they had a different type of upright walking than modern humans, that they had sort of solved some of the problems of upright walking in a slightly different manner than had humans. Now, this was criticized heavily after one Oxnard did this because of some of the pelvises that he used were not in the best condition. Subsequently, reanalysis using better pelvises, Oxnard has retracted that position. So Oxnard himself doesn't hold to that belief. But the whole point of it is that he was discussing whether or not they were actually directly ancestral, not whether or not they were just apes, as Mr. Miller is saying.
Well, flat-faced man was found. It was crushed into about 50 pieces, the size of about a softball. So Miss Leakey and her friends reconstructed it and said, well, the face is slightly flatter than a normal ape's face. Well, all faces are slightly more or less angle than the others, but they put in the textbooks now and say that this is one of our closest missing links. What they don't tell the kids is that flat-faced man stood 2 feet tall.
Like that.
Now, this is too funny. I was going to try to illustrate this with a fancy graphic, but it got to be a little bit, I was spending way too much time on it with, well, it looked like a crappy graphic. So I'm just going to explain this, and I hope you guys can visualize, please. So he makes the claim that that Kenyanthropus, as discovered by Meave Leakey, was 2 feet tall. That's a pretty tiny animal. Now, first of all, the first point to make is that there's no reason why we couldn't have a 2 foot tall hominid some hominid in our lineage that tall. It's not very likely. It's pretty little, but nonetheless, there's nothing in evolution that says. I mean, there's some pretty small species and larger species. I mean, changing size is not difficult for mammal lineages to do. But that aside, so where did this 2-foot tall thing come from? And as best as I searched everywhere trying to figure out where this. Nobody else in the world of creationism or otherwise has ever said that Kenyanthropus is 2 feet tall that I can find. I mean, if any of you know a source for that, that would be great. The response I got from Russ Miller was figured the size of a softball. So, which I maybe I'm wrong on this, and I do apologize if I am, but I'm assuming that meant that heard that the skull was the size of a softball, extrapolate, come up with a height about 2 feet tall, and that would be the logic behind it. But what makes it really hilarious is that the skull of Kenyanthropus was not the size of a softball. The brain case was the size of a softball, which is the quote from Meave Leakey about this small-brained hominid with a brain approximately the size of a softball. Okay, the size of a softball, right? Little brain guy, not the skull the size of a softball. And in fact, the skull, from the description, was approximately 160 millimeters tall. That's if you're looking facing on the skull, looking straight up. That's not counting because there's no lower jaw. That's looking at the height of the skull from the tooth line up to the top of the skull, the top of the cranium, is 160 millimeters tall. Now, that's a little over 6 inches, all right? Now, let's say you have to add a lower jaw in there, and we'll be very generous. We'll say the lower jaw is an additional 4 centimeters, making the entire height of the skull with jaw attached, say 20 centimeters tall, 8 inches tall. That's not unreasonable by any stretch. Unless you try to stick it on a 2-foot tall hominid. You're talking about a hominid that's 2 feet tall, 60 centimeters tall, right? So that means that 1/3 of its entire height is its gigantic, monstrous head. Try to imagine that in your mind. Something this tall with a head that's 1/3 of its total height. And think, how in the hell would that thing walk around? It would have much bigger problems than not just being our ancestor. It would have one hell of a time being existing. But it's very funny. The thing that made me laugh about it when I first saw this claim is that it's not hard to find the size of the Kenyanthropus material. There's a number of different ways you can find it. One really simple way. It's not exactly as accurate as looking at the descriptions. But if you go to places that sell casts of these skulls, they give you the dimensions of the casts. So right there, you can if you don't have the right measurement, you can look at the dimensions they give you and a little bit of math, and you get at least a rough approximation of it. So right there should tell you that the size of the cast. So but the funny thing is that to me was I had this. Okay, you're going on Carl Baugh's television program. I mean, that's pretty huge. I mean, if I was a creationist speaker, hell, if I was any speaker, hell, I'd go on the show if he asked me tomorrow. I mean, that'd be a big deal. It's pretty worldwide exposure. It's TBN. It's big. Probably a lot bigger than the churches that he travels to and talks on. Probably bigger than his YouTube audience. That's pretty huge amount of exposure to get. When I do any public speaking, even if I'm giving a talk that I've given multiple times, I go over my material and I will sit there either with whatever papers are current or wiki at least, and kind of look up and make sure that there's not new information that's come in since the last time I gave it. So it's a good idea to at least kind of do a quick check, run through your talk, look up the material. And so I would think that if indeed it's true that this 2-foot tall claim, I mean, it's not just a little trivial thing. It's not just like, oh, by the way, do you know they were only 2 feet tall? And then go on to explain why they're not human ancestors with other data. The data, his evidence that they are not human ancestors is the fact that they're 2 feet tall. His entire argument regarding Kenyanthropus hinges on the fact that they're 2 feet tall. Where did that claim of 2 feet tall come from? Well, he probably extrapolated it from a misunderstanding of Meave Leakey's quote about the size of the skull. Okay, he mistook skull for brain case, and got the wrong size approximation for the species. That's something that you would want to look at before you go on national television. Just saying. All right, in looking at the rest of the video, there's one short clip I'm going to show from the end, but the rest of it, it's a whole lot more material, but I don't have the energy to cover it anymore. It's a whole lot of Gish Gallop type material, just real quick, first law of thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics, these, just naming a whole bunch of things, listing off things that make evolution impossible with no explanation as to how they make evolution impossible, just assertions. And then there's some, the sort of typical, the throwing in the, how you can be saved portion of it too. And it's not worth, I just don't think it's worth me going into. But I do want to catch this clip I do want to discuss briefly this clip here.
Originally, there was a symbiotic relationship, a beautiful relationship with all living systems. The bacteria, in its perfect proportions, biodegrades once living material to reassimilate that back into the soil, into the plants, for food for Adam and Eve and their posterity. The design was to go on forever.
Okay, so this is interesting to me because so this is talking about the pre-fall time, and I might be wrong on this theologically, but he's talking about the pre-fall time, and that the bacteria, recycling dead material, recycling it, the perfect balance and all that stuff. But I'm pretty damn sure I've heard Carl Baugh. I've certainly heard Hovind and many others from the same philosophy make the statement that there was no death before the fall, which raises a whole lot of questions about how did people eat. No death whatsoever. That's why evolution can't be how God created, because evolution involves death. There was no evolution because there was no death. So therefore, that's an old argument. So if there was no death, what were the bacteria recycling in the Garden of Eden? Just kind of a question I would have. All right. Thanks, guys. And anyway, like I said, the one guy who made it all the way to this part and then probably fell asleep halfway through. Thanks a lot for giving it a go for the Gipper. I appreciate the time you took, and take care.